The day Cynthia Sterling tried to ruin my son's life was the day I decided to ruin hers. It started with a $500 fine for fishing, a fine she levied with a smug smile while my grieving son watched. His heart breaking for the second time in a year, what she didn't know was that I had the resources to turn her little kingdom into dust and the motivation to enjoy every second of it. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful content like this. If you've ever had to sit through a homeowners association meeting and fantasize about flipping the table, you're in the right place. Stick around, because this story is for you. My name is Arthur Vance, and until a few months ago, I was just a retired data analyst looking for some peace. I'd cashed out of a tech company I helped build from the ground up, leaving me with more money than I knew what to do with and a whole lot of time on my hands. But all the money in the world couldn't fix what was broken. My wife, Eleanor, had passed away from a sudden illness 6 months prior, leaving a gaping hole in my life and in the life of our 13-year-old son, Leo. He'd retreated into a shell of video games and silence, and the only thing that seemed to bring a flicker of his old self back was fishing. It was the last thing the three of us did together on a camping trip just a month before she got sick. So I bought a house in what was supposed to be an idyllic community, Sterling Meadows. It had pristine lawns, a top-rated school, and its centerpiece was a gorgeous 20-acre private lake. The realtor mentioned the HOA, of course, but brushed it off as standard procedure. They just make sure everyone's lawn is green and the trash cans are hidden, she'd said. The HOA president, Cynthia Sterling, is very dedicated to maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic. That should have been my first red flag. Dedicated is a polite word for tyrannical. I discovered just how dedicated on a crisp Saturday morning. Leo and I were on the small community dock, a gentle mist rising from the lake. He'd just reeled in a small bass, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was beaming, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. "Dad, look, he's a fighter." That pure, perfect moment was shattered by a sharp, condescending voice. "I'm sorry, but what do you two think you're doing?" A woman in her late 50s, dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a visor that probably cost more than our fishing rods, was striding toward us. She held a clipboard like a weapon and wore an expression of profound disappointment, as if she caught us tagging the community gazebo. I tried to be friendly. "Good morning. Just a little father-son time. I'm Arthur Vance. We just moved into the house on Willow Creek." She completely ignored my introduction. "I am Cynthia Sterling, president of this association, and fishing is strictly forbidden. It's a violation of Bylaw 17, subsection C." My smile faded. Leo's smile had already vanished. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice calm. "We checked for signs. There's nothing posted. The realtor even mentioned the lake was stocked for fishing." Cynthia's lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. "The bylaws were updated last month. An email was sent to all residents. It's not my responsibility if you don't read your emails." She was already scribbling on a violation notice. "The fine for unauthorized recreational activities is $500. $500. I looked at Leo, who was staring at his shoes, his shoulders slumped. The fish which he gently unhooked, lay gasping on the wet dock, a perfect metaphor for his joy. I felt a cold anger begin to rise, a feeling I hadn't felt in years. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that seems a bit excessive for—" She cut me off. "Mr. Vance, we maintain a certain standard here at Sterling Meadows. This isn't some public pond. We don't want fish guts and smelly bait ruining the pristine views for residents who are trying to enjoy their morning coffee." She glanced at Leo, then back at me, her eyes lingering on our simple tackle box. "Perhaps you're used to a different kind of neighborhood." The implication hung in the air, thick and ugly. She wasn't just enforcing a rule, she was passing judgment. She was a classist bully on a power trip. "We'll pack up," I said quietly, putting a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Just send me the violation notice." Her smile returned, victorious. "Of course. And do try to keep up with the community standards in the future." As she walked away, I watched her go, the anger in my chest solidifying into something harder, something colder. Purpose. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wet. Why was she so mean, Dad? We weren't doing anything wrong. I didn't have an answer for him, not a simple one anyway. But as we walked home in silence, I made a silent promise to him, to my late wife, and to myself. Cynthia Sterling had picked a fight with the wrong man. She thought she was dealing with some grieving newcomer she could push around. She had no idea she'd just declared war on a man who had made his fortune finding and exploiting systemic weaknesses. And her precious HOA was the most flawed system I'd ever seen. That night, after confirming that no email about a fishing ban had ever been sent to me, not even to my spam folder, I began my research. Cynthia Sterling, I learned, had been the HOA president for 5 years straight, running unopposed. Her husband was a high-powered corporate lawyer who was rarely home, and she ran a small, exclusive interior design business out of her lakefront mansion. I also found something much more interesting buried deep in the county's public property records: a discrepancy. According to the official plat map, the 20-acre lake and a 15-foot perimeter of shoreline weren't actually owned by the Sterling Meadows Homeowners Association. They were still legally the property of a defunct company, Meadowlark Development Corporation, which had gone bankrupt during the 2008 financial crisis. The HOA had a long-term lease for recreational use, but that lease, I discovered after another hour of digging, was set to expire in exactly 3 months. This changed everything. Cynthia wasn't a queen ruling her kingdom. She was a tenant in a house she didn't own, acting like she held the deed. The next morning, I was checking my mail when an older gentleman walking a golden retriever stopped to introduce himself. "Henry Harrison," he said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Saw you had a run-in with our dear leader yesterday." I nodded grimly. "You could say that. She wasn't a fan of my fishing pole." Henry chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "Cynthia isn't a fan of anything that she can't control. She's been running this place like her own personal fiefdom for years. Most of us just pay the ridiculous fines to avoid the headache." He leaned in a little closer. "But if you're looking to actually fight back, you should know a few things. Come by for a cup of coffee this afternoon. I've got a file on her that might interest you." I took him up on the offer. Henry's study was a cozy room filled with books on history and law. He poured 2 cups of coffee and pulled out a thick binder. "Here's the deal," he began. "Cynthia knows that lease is expiring. What you probably don't know is that she's been in secret negotiations with the bank that holds Meadowlark Development's assets. She's trying to buy the lake herself, not for the HOA, but for a private investment group she's formed with a few of her cronies." He showed me documents he'd acquired through a friend at the county clerk's office. A new LLC, Sterling Lake Holdings, had been formed 2 months ago. The listed agent was Cynthia's husband. "Her plan," Henry continued, "is to buy the lake for a bargain price, then rezone the northern third of it to build 4 luxury waterfront homes, which her real estate friends will sell for a massive commission. The new fishing ban, the talk of pristine views, it's all part of her strategy to slowly choke off resident access so no one complains when she finally privatizes it completely." It all clicked into place. The condescension, the sudden rule change, the immediate and aggressive fine. It wasn't just petty tyranny. It was a calculated business strategy. Henry then introduced me to Beatrice, a young mother who lived down the street. She'd been fined repeatedly by Cynthia for having a child's play structure in her backyard that was supposedly the wrong shade of forest green. She told me it was an eyesore that lowered property values, Beatrice recounted, her voice still shaking with anger. Then a week later, her best friend, 2 doors down, installed an almost identical one. And Cynthia said it was a charming addition to the neighborhood. Through Henry and Beatrice, we formed a small secret alliance. We started a private messaging group to share stories and document Cynthia's selective enforcement. The pattern was undeniable. Fines were disproportionately levied against newer residents, families with young children, and anyone who had ever dared to question her authority at an HOA meeting. While my new allies gathered anecdotal evidence, I put my data analysis skills to work. I had the capital, the time, and now the motivation. I started by looking into the bank handling the assets of the defunct developer. They were a small regional bank that had been hit hard by recent economic downturns. They were likely desperate to offload a non-performing asset like a parcel of land and a lake that generated 0 revenue. Then I began to formulate a plan. It was audacious, expensive, and deeply, deeply satisfying. Cynthia wanted to play a game of rules and ownership. Fine. But I wasn't going to play by her rules. I was going to buy the whole damn game board. I knew from my career that a direct all-cash offer to a desperate seller is almost impossible to refuse. Cynthia was likely trying to assemble investors and secure financing, a process that takes time. I didn't need time. I had the money sitting in an investment account waiting for a purpose. This felt like the worthiest purpose I'd found in a long time. The harassment, as expected, escalated. After I formally contested my fine in an email, citing the lack of public signage and prior notification, I started receiving a flurry of new violations. My grass was apparently 1/4 of an inch too high. A small crack in my driveway, which had been there when I bought the house, was suddenly a structural hazard. I was even cited for having aesthetically inappropriate wind chimes, the very ones Eleanor had hung on our back porch. The fines totaled over $1,000 in 2 weeks. But the moment that truly hardened my resolve came one afternoon when Leo came home from school looking defeated. Some of the kids at school are saying we're trouble, he mumbled, refusing to look at me. They said their parents told them, you're trying to ruin the neighborhood. The kids, I quickly learned, were the children of Cynthia's closest allies on the HOA board. They weren't just coming after me anymore, they were targeting my son. That was a line she never should have crossed. That night, after Leo was asleep, I made a call to my wealth manager. I need to liquidate $1.5 million in assets, I said, my voice steady. I need it in a holding account by the end of the week. I'm about to make a purchase. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Big move, Arthur. Another startup? Something like that, I replied, looking out my window at the dark, silent lake. You could call it a hostile takeover. I arranged a discreet meeting with a vice president at the bank that held the deed to the lake. I didn't go as Arthur Vance, disgruntled homeowner. I went as the managing partner of a newly created investment LLC, Eleanor's Legacy Holdings. My proposal was simple and brutally effective. I knew from my research that Cynthia's group had offered the bank $750,000 with a complex financing plan and a 90-day closing period. I'll offer you $1.2 million, I told the bank VP, a man named Peterson, who looked tired and overworked. All cash. We can close in 10 business days. Peterson's eyes widened. He tried to maintain a poker face, but I could see the gears turning. For a bank struggling with liquidity, a fast, all-cash offer for nearly double the competing bid was a lifeline they couldn't ignore. Your offer is very compelling, he said, trying to sound measured. But we do have an existing letter of intent with another party. I smiled. A letter of intent isn't a signed contract. My offer is on the table for 48 hours. After that, I walked. I left the meeting knowing I had him. The other party was a risk. I was a sure thing. While the bank deliberated, Cynthia, completely oblivious to the storm about to break over her head, decided to escalate her campaign. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting. The stated purpose was to vote on a special assessment of $200 per household for urgent lakefront maintenance and safety upgrades. Henry Harrison confirmed my suspicions. The $200 fee, multiplied by the 200 homes in the community, would generate $40,000. It wasn't for maintenance. It was to cover the legal fees for Cynthia's impending purchase and to show the bank she had community capital behind her. The meeting was her stage, and she played the part of the concerned leader perfectly. She stood at a podium in the community clubhouse, a PowerPoint presentation glowing behind her with pictures of cracked dock boards and supposed shoreline erosion. My fellow residents, she began, her voice filled with fake solemnity. Our most precious asset, our beautiful lake, is in jeopardy. We must act now to preserve its beauty and, more importantly, our property values. She then pivoted, launching a thinly veiled attack on me. Unfortunately, certain new residents have shown a blatant disregard for our community's rules and values. They want to turn our serene sanctuary into a common fishing hole. This kind of behavior threatens the very fabric of Sterling Meadows. Several of her cronies nodded in agreement. I just sat in the back, silent, letting her dig her own grave. She felt so powerful, so completely in control, that she couldn't imagine a reality where she didn't hold all the cards. The vote for the special assessment was a sham. She didn't allow for a secret ballot. Instead, asking for a show of hands. Under her watchful eye, many reluctant residents raised their hands, unwilling to be singled out as her next target. The motion passed easily. Cynthia beamed, looking directly at me with an expression of pure triumph. "I'm so glad we can all come together as a community to do what's right," she said. At that moment, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my lawyer. The subject line read, "It's done." The bank had accepted my offer. The preliminary paperwork was signed. The lake was mine. I resisted the overwhelming urge to stand up and announce it right there. No, that would be too simple. The timing had to be perfect. The humiliation had to be public. I decided to wait until the day of her big lakefront appreciation party, an exclusive, invitation-only event she was planning for the following weekend to celebrate her supposed victory and rally support for her development plan. She had no idea she was about to host a party on my private property. The week leading up to Cynthia's party was a master class in hubris. She sent out a glossy newsletter paid for with HOA funds, touting the new Lake Preservation Initiative. It featured architectural renderings of the new luxury homes she planned to build, deceptively labeled as future community amenities. She was so confident, so sure of her victory, that she was publicly advertising her corrupt scheme. Meanwhile, I was quietly finalizing the transfer of the deed and hiring a commercial fencing company. My instructions were precise. I wanted a tasteful but unambiguous 6-foot wrought iron fence installed around the entire 15-foot shoreline perimeter that I now owned. The installation was scheduled for 7 a.m. on the day of her party. I also had a dozen signs professionally made. They were elegant, carved wood with crisp white lettering. They read, "Private property, owned and managed by Eleanor's Legacy Holdings, no trespassing." The day of the party arrived. It was a perfect sunny afternoon. As caterers set up tables and a string quartet began to tune their instruments on Cynthia's sprawling lakefront lawn, the fencing crew was finishing its work. The final panel was locked into place just as the first guests began to arrive. The confusion was immediate and beautiful to watch. Guests in pastel-colored outfits and boat shoes walked down to the lake, only to be met by a brand new, very solid fence. They would point, murmur, and look back at Cynthia's house with puzzled expressions. Cynthia herself was too busy playing the gracious hostess to notice at first. She was greeting the mayor and a few city council members she had invited to schmooze for her future zoning applications. I waited until the party was in full swing with about 60 people milling about her lawn. Then, with Henry and Beatrice by my side, I made my entrance. I didn't go to her door. I walked to the new service gate my crew had installed in the fence, unlocked it with my own key, and stepped onto the shoreline. I walked calmly along the water's edge, inside the fence line, until I was directly in front of her party. The music faltered as people started to notice me. All eyes turned. Cynthia finally saw me. Her face, which had been wreathed in a triumphant smile, curdled into a mask of pure rage. She marched toward the fence, her heels sinking into the soft grass. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this? Who authorized this fence? Get off this property immediately!" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the now silent lawn. I stood calmly on my side of the fence and gave her a polite, cold smile. "Actually, Cynthia, I believe you and your guests are the ones on the wrong side of the property line," I said, my voice carrying clearly, in the quiet air. I held up a crisp, notarized copy of the property deed. As of 3 days ago, I am the legal owner of this lake and the land 15 feet from its shoreline. This fence is on my property. And technically, I added, gesturing to her stunned guests, you are all trespassing. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The mayor looked utterly bewildered. Cynthia's face went from red to a pale, waxy white. That's impossible, she stammered. I have an agreement with the bank. You had a letter of intent, I corrected her gently. I had $1.2 million in cash. They chose the cash. It's just good business. You should understand that. I then turned to address her guests. I apologize for the interruption, everyone. Please enjoy the party. Just be aware that the lake is now under new management and is closed to the public, effective immediately. I gave Cynthia one last lingering look. The pure, unadulterated shock on her face was worth every single penny. I then turned, walked back to my gate, locked it behind me, and went home, leaving her to explain to the mayor, her friends, and the entire neighborhood how she'd managed to lose their lake. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the reveal. Cynthia's party imploded. The mayor and city council members made quiet, hasty exits, not wanting to be associated with the public relations disaster. Her friends began whispering, casting accusatory glances her way. The next day, the entire community was buzzing. My fence and signs were the talk of the town. Cynthia tried to spin the story, sending out a frantic email claiming a hostile corporate raider had stolen the community's asset through a legal loophole. But it was too late. Henry and Beatrice had already circulated an email of their own to our secret list of residents, explaining the full story, Cynthia's secret plan, her shell company, and her intention to build private homes. They attached a copy of the public deed registration with my LLC's name on it. The narrative was no longer hers to control. She tried to sue. Her lawyer sent me a blustering cease and desist letter claiming the HOA had a prescriptive easement for lake access. My attorney responded with a single, devastating letter, pointing out that their recreational lease had expired and that their own actions, banning fishing and other activities, had already violated the terms of any implied community use. Her lawsuit was dead before it was even filed. The HOA board, which had once been her loyal rubber stamp, began to fracture. Faced with an angry community that had been lied to, several board members publicly called for her resignation. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed and the atmosphere was mutinous. People who had been afraid to speak up for years were now demanding answers. Where did our money for the special assessment go? One resident shouted. Why were you trying to buy the lake with a private company? Another demanded. Cynthia tried to gavel the meeting to order, but her authority had completely evaporated. The meeting ended with the board voting to launch a full independent audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years. That audit, as I knew it would, uncovered years of embezzlement and misappropriation of funds. Consulting fees paid to companies owned by her family, lavish community events that were essentially private parties for her friends, and thousands of dollars in unaccounted for legal expenses. Faced with imminent legal charges and public disgrace, Cynthia Sterling and her husband put their house up for sale and left town in the middle of the night. Her reign was over. A few weeks later, I took down the no trespassing signs. In their place, I put up a single, large new sign at the entrance to the dock. It read, Eleanor's Lake, open to all residents of Sterling Meadows. Rules, be kind, clean up after yourself, and always, always let the kids fish. That weekend, I hosted a community-wide barbecue. I invited everyone. As I watched families kayaking on the water and kids laughing as they tried to cast their fishing lines from the dock, Leo came and stood beside me. He had his fishing rod in his hand. "Dad," he said, looking out at the sparkling water, "Mom would have loved this." He was smiling again, that same genuine, brilliant smile I'd seen on the dock that first morning. This time, there was no one there to shatter it. I had spent a fortune, declared war on a neighborhood tyrant, and upended a corrupt system, all because of a $500 fine. But looking at my son, happy and at peace, I knew it wasn't about the money or the revenge. It was about reclaiming that one perfect moment and making sure nothing like that could ever happen to anyone in our community again. And that was a price I would gladly pay any day of the week.